The Queen's grief. The great halls of the alien palace were silent. The banners of victory that once hung with pride now seemed like faded cloth, whispering of days that would never return. The alien queen sat upon her high throne, her hands gripping the cold armrests, her eyes fixed on nothing. Her people whispered in fear, for their queen had not spoken with fire since the day her daughter was declared lost in battle. The queen's daughter had been the heart of the empire, brave, strong, and filled with the fire of youth. She had led her armies into the stars. But one fateful war had turned the skies red. Her ship was struck, her signals lost, and only wreckage was found drifting among the cold stars. The court declared her gone, the empire mourned, and the queen's heart turned into stone. Every night the queen walked the empty gardens of crystal. She remembered her daughter's laughter echoing between the shining walls. She remembered the way her daughter's voice carried hope, even in times of war. Now, the silence of the garden weighed heavier than any crown. The empire felt the weight too, for without the princess, their hope dimmed. Enemies of the empire saw weakness. At the borders, hostile fleets moved closer, testing the defenses. Some spoke in whispers that the dynasty was broken. Some said the empire would soon fall to flames. But none dared speak these words in front of the queen, for her grief was as sharp as her anger. On the council floor, her generals argued. They demanded new heirs, stronger armies, or surrender. The queen sat in silence, listening to their fear. She did not answer, for she knew what they did not. Her heart refused to believe her daughter was truly gone. A mother feels what others cannot. Yet even that faint hope was fading with each passing day. One night, as the stars glowed like shattered diamonds beyond the palace towers, the K.N. stood alone at her balcony. She whispered her daughter's name to the void. Her voice trembled, not like a ruler, but like a mother who had lost too much. The wind carried her words into the endless sky, and for the first time in years her tears fell freely. The galaxy was wide and merciless, and even queens could not command fate. But fate has a strange way of returning what seems lost. Far at the edge of the empire, where no ships patrolled, a signal pulsed, faint and broken. It was weak, almost drowned by the static of the stars, but it carried a code, a royal code. The watchers in the outposts trembled when they saw it. They rushed the message through channels until it reached the throne world. The queen's advisors brought her the report. They warned it was only noise, perhaps a trick from enemies. But when the queen saw the signal with her own eyes, her hands shook. It was the same code her daughter once used, the same voice hidden inside the noise of space. Her heart, once cold as stone, now burned again. Could it be true? After all these years, her daughter was alive. The queen did not speak of it to the court. She kept the signal close, like a secret flame in her chest. But her nights changed. Her eyes now searched the stars not with grief, but with desperate hope. She dreamed of the day the palace gates would open and her daughter would walk through them. She dreamed of a reunion. Though fear whispered that it was only illusion, the empire continued its slow decline. Enemies moved like vultures. The queen's council begged for strength, but she gave no answer. Her thoughts belonged only to the signal. The possibility that her daughter lived haunted every moment. Her people began to notice the change. They saw a flicker of light in their queen's face, though she still wore the mask of steel. But deep within her, a storm was forming. If her daughter lived, the galaxy itself would tremble, for no one, not even the enemies at her gates, could understand the fury of a mother who had been forced to mourn too soon. And no one, not even the queen herself, could imagine what her daughter might bring back with her. For somewhere, across the vast emptiness of space, the lost princess was not alone. She was traveling with a companion unlike any the alien empire had ever known. A human. The arrival. The throne room was filled with whispers. Messengers had come from the border outposts, carrying urgent news. A lone warship had crossed into the empire's space, damaged and broken, moving like a wounded beast through the stars. The guards had scanned its signal again and again, for it carried the impossible. The royal code of the missing princess. The queen rose from her throne for the first time in weeks. Her voice, though heavy with years of grief, carried power that silenced the court. "Bring the ship to the capital," she commanded. The generals hesitated, warning that it could be a trap, but none dared defy her. The queen's eyes burned with something they had not seen in years, hope. The days passed like storms. Across the skies of the capital world, people looked upward. They saw the broken silhouette of the warship approaching, its hull scarred, engines sputtering. The Empire held its breath. Could it truly be her, the lost heir, returning from the darkness of war? When the ship landed upon the royal docks, silence swept through the crowd. The Queen herself walked forward, her guards at her side, her robes flowing like shadows of night. The ramp lowered with a deep hiss, smoke curled from the ship's wounds, sparks dancing across its broken metal. And then a figure stepped forward. It was her, the princess thought lost. Her armor was cracked, her face marked with scars, but her eyes still burned with life. The Queen's breath caught, her heart leaping in her chest. The court gasped as they saw her walk down the ramp, slow but strong. The Queen wanted to run to her daughter, but she held herself like a ruler. Her people must see their strength, not their weakness. But the princess was not alone. Beside her walked a figure no one expected. Tall, strange, and unlike any creature in the Empire, a human. His uniform was torn, his steps steady, his gaze sharp like a blade. The crowd drew back in fear, murmuring like waves crashing against stone. For never before had a human stood upon the royal docks, not as prey, not as prisoner, but as equal to their princess. The Queen's eyes locked upon the stranger. Who was this being who dared walk at her daughter's side? What bond had formed between them in the fires of battle? And why did her daughter's hand rest so easily upon his arm, as if they had fought together through life and death? The princess bowed before her mother. Her voice was steady, though her body trembled from exhaustion. "I have returned, my queen," she said. Her words carried through the silent court. "And I did not return alone." The queen stepped forward, her hand reaching out. For a heartbeat she forgot the eyes of her people, the weight of her crown. She touched her daughter's face, felt the warmth of life where once there had only been grief. Tears burned her eyes, but she forced them back. Her voice was iron, though her heart was fire. "You live," she whispered. "Yes, mother," the princess answered, her eyes shining with pride. "And this human is the reason why." Shock rippled through the court like thunder. The Queen's advisors whispered furiously. A human saving the royal heir, standing at her side as if he belonged. It was impossible, unthinkable, dangerous. But it was truth, carried in the scars upon both their bodies. The Queen's gaze fell heavy upon the human. She studied him as she would study a weapon. He stood unflinching before her, his eyes steady, his breath calm. There was no fear in him, only quiet strength. He did not bow, yet he did not challenge. He simply stood, a silent guardian at her daughter's side. The Queen turned to her daughter. "What is his name?" she asked, though her voice carried suspicion. The princess shook her head softly. "He is not my servant, not my soldier, not my possession," she said. "He is my ally, my protector, my companion." Her words struck the court like fire. For the first time in history, an alien royal declared loyalty to a human. The Queen's lips pressed into a thin line. Her heart was torn between joy and unease. She had her daughter back, yet this return carried shadows she could not see clearly. The court demanded answers, the Empire demanded strength. But for that night, the Queen ordered silence. She led her daughter back into the palace, the human following close behind. In the great halls of the palace, the whispers grew. Some called the human a savior, others called him a threat. Some believed he carried power the Empire could not yet understand. The Queen, though filled with questions, felt one truth growing stronger with every passing moment. Her daughter had returned alive, but not unchanged, and the human was not a shadow beside her, but a flame that burned just as bright. The Empire had been given back its princess, but with her return came a mystery, and mysteries in the heart of a crumbling empire could change the fate of the galaxy. The human stranger. The palace was alive with whispers. Every corridor carried rumors about the human who walked beside the princess. Servants glanced at him with wide eyes, guards tightened their grips on their weapons, and nobles whispered behind their jeweled hands. The alien empire had seen humans before, but never like this. Humans had always been considered weak, a species of little consequence, fit for study, sometimes for trade, but never for honor. Yet this one walked with strength. He did not bow, he did not stumble. His steps were steady, his eyes sharp. The Queen's council watched him with suspicion. They demanded to know his purpose, his rank, his origin, but the princess gave them little. "He saved me," she said, "and that is all you need to know." The Queen, though grateful for her daughter's return, felt unease. This stranger stood in her halls under her protection, yet he answered to no one. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. Even the generals noticed it. It was as though he carried a strength greater than his size, a quiet power that made others listen, even when they didn't want to. At the council chamber, the debates grew heated. The empire was crumbling under the pressure of enemies pressing at their borders. The generals demanded warships, new heirs, and stronger armies. But the Queen's daughter stood and said, "We do not need more of the same. We need something new." She glanced at the human beside her, and silence fell across the chamber. The Queen narrowed her eyes. "You trust him so deeply?" she asked her daughter. The princess nodded, her voice steady. "He fought beside me when all others fell, when my ship was destroyed, when the enemy hunted me through broken worlds, when even I began to lose hope. He stood. He never left my side." The generals scoffed. "What can one human do against fleets of war?" they cried. The princess did not answer. But the human stepped forward. His voice was calm, deep, and unshaken. "One human cannot change a war," he said. "But the right idea can." The council murmured, anger rising. But the Queen raised her hand for silence. "Then speak, human," she said, her voice like a blade. "What makes you so valuable to my daughter, and why should I allow you to remain here?" The human met her gaze without fear. "I do not ask for your throne. I do not ask for your trust," he said. "I only ask that you judge me not by what I am, but by what I can do." Those words echoed in the chamber, simple yet sharp. The Queen said nothing. But deep inside, she felt something she had not expected. Curiosity. That night, the palace was attacked. Enemy spies had slipped through the outer defenses, hoping to strike while the empire was weak. Alarms blared, guards clashed with assassins in the shadowed halls. The Queen was rushed to safety, but chaos spread, blades flashed, shadows fell, and the palace shook with cries of battle. The princess drew her weapon, standing firm at her mother's side. The human stepped forward, calm even in the storm. He fought with a style none had seen before. Fast, direct, efficient. Where alien blades danced with ceremony, his strikes were brutal, final, and effective. Enemies fell before him like fire through dry leaves. The guards watched in disbelief. This was not the weakness they had imagined of humans. This was something raw, something honed through survival. The human fought not as one trained by tradition, but as one who had faced death countless times and learned from it. When the battle ended, the assassins lay defeated. The human stood bloodied but unbroken, his breath steady, his eyes sharp as ever. The princess wiped her blade and smiled faintly. "This is why I trust him," she said to her mother. The Queen, though she did not show it, felt her heart stir with something she had not felt since the old wars. Respect. The court could no longer dismiss him as a curiosity. The palace guards whispered of his skill. The servants whispered of his courage. And even the generals, though they scowled, began to watch him differently. He was no longer just a stranger. He was a presence, a force, a question they could not yet answer. That night, as the Queen stood alone in her chambers, she thought of her daughter's words. "He saved me." And now, she had seen it with her own eyes. The human was more than chance, more than luck. He was something the Empire did not yet understand, and that made him dangerous, but also perhaps necessary, for the first time, the Queen wondered not if her daughter had survived because of him, but if her empire might survive because of him too. Secrets revealed. The palace had returned to a fragile calm. The assassins were gone, their bodies burned in silence, yet the memory of the attack lingered like smoke in the air. The council demanded answers, the generals demanded vengeance, and the people demanded to know why their enemies had struck so boldly. But the Queen demanded something else. She wanted the truth. The truth about her daughter's survival, and about the human who now stood like a shadow beside her. In the grand chamber, torches burned with pale light. The Queen sat on her throne, her daughter standing proudly before her, the human silent at her side. The court was filled with nobles, advisors, and guards, all leaning forward as if the very walls hungered for the story. The queen's voice cut through the silence. "Tell me," she said, her words sharp but trembling beneath. "How did you survive when all hope was lost, and what role did this human play?" The princess took a breath. Her eyes closed for a moment as memories surged back like storm waves. "When my ship fell in battle, I was cast into the void," she said. "My soldiers were scattered, my allies destroyed. I should have died there, drifting among broken steel and fire." Her hand trembled slightly, but her voice did not. "But I did not die because he found me." The court murmured, eyes turning toward the human. The queen's gaze did not waver. Her daughter continued, "He was not of our fleets, not of our empire, not of any power we knew. He found me in the ruins, pulled me from the wreckage, and when the enemy hunted me, he stood against them." The generals scoffed. "One man cannot fight an army," they said. The princess raised her chin, her voice sharp. "Yet he did. He fought not like us, not with the style of empires and honor, but with the fire of survival. He killed with speed, with precision, with a will that did not break." The human remained silent, his eyes scanning the chamber as if always preparing for danger. The princess stepped closer to her mother, her voice lowering. "He carried me through worlds that had fallen to ash. We hid among the ruins of dead cities. We crossed deserts of glass where no life could breathe. He gave me food when I had none, water when I thought I would wither. When I was wounded, he carried me on his back. When I lost hope, he reminded me of it." The queen's fingers curled tight around the arms of her throne. Her daughter's words painted pictures of a journey no royal had ever endured. It was not the tale of a princess guarded by fleets and armies. It was the tale of a survivor walking beside a human who had become more than just a stranger. But there was more. The princess's voice grew firmer, her eyes locked on the council. "You speak of humans as weak, but you do not know them. I have seen their fire, their will, their refusal to kneel before the void. They are not what we believed. They are something more." The chamber erupted with noise. Some shouted in anger, calling her words madness. Others whispered in awe, shaken by the idea of a species they had long dismissed. The queen raised her hand, and silence fell like a blade, her gaze fixed on her daughter, then on the human. Her voice was low, but heavy with meaning. "And what do you call him, daughter? What is he to you?" The princess did not hesitate. "He is my savior, my shield, my companion," she said, her voice unwavering. "Without him, I would not stand before you today. Without him, the royal line would have ended in the fire of battle." The queen's heart twisted. She had her daughter back, but she was no longer the same child she remembered. She was stronger, harder, shaped by survival and bonded to a human in ways the queen could not yet understand. The court watched as silence grew heavy once more. The queen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "If what you say is true, then he is more dangerous than any enemy, for he is proof that humans are not weak prey but something else, something that may one day rival even us." The human finally spoke, his voice steady. "I do not seek to rival you," he said. "I only seek to survive, and I will fight for those who stand beside me." His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of truth. The queen felt it, the court felt it, even the generals could not deny it. The stranger was not boasting, he was not threatening, he was simply stating what he was, a survivor, unbroken, unyielding. That night, when the chamber emptied and the whispers faded, the queen sat alone, her heart warred with itself. Her daughter was alive, but her fate was now tied to this human, and the queen knew well that bonds forged in the fire of survival were stronger than any chains of blood. The question now was not whether the human belonged in her halls, but whether he belonged in the future of her empire. The rising war. The empire's skies no longer felt safe. At the edges of the star maps, red lights burned brighter every day. Enemy fleets gathered in silence, like predators circling a wounded beast. The nobles felt the fear, the generals felt the pressure, and the people whispered that the empire's end was close. But the queen stood tall, though her heart trembled, for now she had her daughter back, and with her came the human whose presence unsettled every soul in the court. The council met in the great war chamber. Maps of the stars floated in the air, glowing with shifting light. The generals pointed to the gathering fleets, speaking of numbers, weapons, and doom. "We cannot hold the borders," one said. "Not without allies, not without more soldiers." Another slammed his fist. "We must retreat, protect only the capital." The queen's face hardened. "We do not retreat," she declared, her voice like thunder, but silence followed her words, for no one could deny the truth. The empire was weaker than ever. Without the princess, they had lost their symbol, and though she had returned, the scars of war still marked her. The empire was not ready for another great battle, and yet, the battle was coming. The princess stepped forward, her armor gleaming faintly under the warlight. "We cannot fight this war as we did before," she said. "Our enemies know our tactics, our formations, our every move." The generals growled, unwilling to admit failure. But then the human stepped into the light. He placed his hand upon the star map, shifting the glowing shapes of fleets and worlds. His voice was calm, sharp, and filled with certainty. "Then stop fighting like them," he said. The council turned on him with outrage. "What does a human know of Star Wars?" they shouted. "He is nothing, an outsider, a tool at best." But the queen raised her hand, silencing them, her eyes narrowed with interest. "Speak," she ordered. The human nodded, and his fingers traced patterns across the glowing stars. "Your fleets are heavy, slow, predictable. You fight with honor, with pride, but your enemies fight with hunger, with deception. They will break your lines, because they know exactly where you will stand." The generals sneered, but the queen leaned closer. "And you suggest something different?" she asked. The human's gaze swept across the map. "Strike where they do not. Expect, move where they believe you cannot. Use smaller ships, faster strikes, weapons in silence instead of drums of war. Turn every weakness into bait and every trap into fire." The court was divided. Some shouted in fury, calling it dishonor. Others murmured in awe, feeling the sharp edge of his words. The princess spoke then, her voice clear and steady. "I have seen his strategies. When we were hunted, it was not strength alone that saved us, but his mind. We turned ruins into shields, silence into cover, traps into survival. Without his ways, I would not be here." The queen's gaze swept over her court. Her daughter's voice carried truth, undeniable and sharp. Her generals hated it, but deep inside, even they knew their pride could not save them this time. The queen spoke at last, her voice cutting through the storm. "Prepare the fleets," she commanded, "but prepare them his way." Shock rippled across the chamber. The generals bowed reluctantly. The nobles whispered like serpents, but the decision was made. The empire would fight not with the ways of old, but with something new. The human strategies began to take form. Ships were divided, weapons hidden in places no enemy would expect. Fleets moved like shadows instead of armies. The empire began to breathe differently. For the first time in years, there was not only fear in the air, but anticipation. But the enemies were not blind. They watched the empire's movements, sensing change. They gathered even greater numbers, determined to crush what remained of the alien throne. Scouts reported fleets so vast that stars themselves seemed to vanish behind their shadows. The people of the empire trembled. Yet the queen stood unbroken, her daughter at her side, and the humans' quiet fire guiding their steps. The night before the Great War, the queen walked alone in her private chamber. She thought of her daughter, once believed lost, now standing tall again. She thought of the human, a stranger who had become a shield in the heart of her empire, and she thought of the dawn to come, a dawn that might burn her world to ash. She closed her eyes and whispered to the stars, "If fate demands fire, let it come. But if fate has given me these two for a reason, let that reason be victory." Beyond the palace walls, the fleets prepared. Engines roared like storms, weapons glowed like suns. The empire was ready to rise or fall, and at the center of it all stood the human, a single figure from a world long dismissed, now holding the strategies that could either save the empire or bury it forever. Fire in the sky. The dawn of war arrived. From the palace towers, the queen watched the skies ignite. Her fleets rose like black wings, thousands of ships cutting across the void. The air shook with engines. The ground trembled with their power, and across the empire, every soul held their breath. The enemy was coming, larger and stronger than anything they had ever faced. The generals stood ready in the war chamber, their eyes fixed on the glowing star maps. The queen sat tall upon her throne of command, the princess by her side, the human standing silent yet sharp as a blade. The enemy fleets appeared on the horizon of space, a wave of steel and fire, blotting out stars as they advanced. Their numbers seemed endless, their formation like a storm, steady and crushing. The court whispered in fear, but the queen's voice rang clear. "Hold to the plan," she commanded. The first clash came swift. The Empire's outer ships darted forward, smaller and faster than before. They struck quick, vanishing into the void before the enemy could crush them. Explosions rippled across the black, bright like Sue's. Hence born and dying in seconds, the generals gasped, unused to such tactics. But the human stood calm, his eyes fixed on the unfolding storm. The enemy pressed harder. They unleashed volleys of fire, burning through the dark, tearing apart decoys and empty hulls. But each strike led them deeper into traps. Mines hidden among drifting wrecks exploded beneath their fleets. Weapons concealed on broken moons lit up with deadly fire. For the first time, the enemy hesitated. They realized the Empire was not fighting as before. It was fighting like something new. The princess led the charge from her warship. Her voice carried through the comms, strong and fierce. "Strike as shadows, vanish as ghosts, bleed them one by one," she ordered. Her crew obeyed without question, for she had walked through fire and returned, and her presence filled them with courage. Beside her, the human moved through the command deck, calm and steady. His mind saw the battlefield not as chaos, but as patterns, lines, and opportunities. "Now," he said, his voice quiet, yet absolute. The princess gave the order, and fleets hidden behind asteroids broke forward. They cut through the enemy's flank like blades through flesh. Ships exploded, fire consumed the dark, and the enemy formation cracked. For the first time in generations, the Empire struck fear into its enemies. But victory was not yet won. The enemy commander unleashed the heart of his fleet. Massive warships larger than cities, their weapons roared, tearing apart dozens of smaller ships in seconds. The chamber shook with cries as reports flooded in. Even the queen's face darkened, her knuckles tightening on the armrests of her command throne. The human stepped forward again, his voice cutting through the storm of fear. "Pull them closer," he said. The generals snapped at him. "Closer means death." But the queen raised her hand, silencing them. Her eyes burned as she looked at him. "You are certain?" she asked. The human nodded. "Certain," he said simply. The order was given. The Empire's fleets fell back, luring the giant warships forward. The enemy believed the Empire was breaking, pressing harder, hungrier, but in truth, they were being led into the heart of a snare. When the enemy ships reached the coordinates, the void itself lit up. Ancient stations long abandoned came alive. Hidden weapons buried deep within shattered moons awakened, and the skies became fire. The enemy warships were torn apart by sudden storms of light and steel. Engines burst, hulls cracked, fleets scattered in confusion. The Empire struck from every side, not as a wall, but as knives, fast and merciless. The humans' tactics unfolded like a web, and the enemy was caught in every strand. The princess's ship surged forward, leading the final strike. She stood tall, her blade raised even within the command deck. "For the Empire, for our people," she cried. Her fleet roared in answer. They dove into the heart of the broken enemy, cutting it apart piece by piece. The queen's eyes filled with fire as she watched. For years, she had carried grief and doubt, but now she saw her daughter alive, leading, unbroken, and beside her the human whose strength had become the Empire's new weapon. This was not just survival, this was rebirth. The battle raged for hours, fire consumed the void, ships burned, stars flickered behind curtains of smoke and wreckage, and when at last the enemy broke, fleeing into the black, the Empire stood victorious. The palace bells rang across the capital, their sound like thunder across the world. The people wept, shouted, and lifted their voices in a single cry. The Empire lived, yet even in victory, the queen's mind was restless. She had seen what her empire could become under human fire. She had seen her daughter's bond with the stranger grow into something unshakable, and she knew the galaxy would not forget this day, for it was not only the Empire that had fought and won, It was the Empire and a human standing together. The fire in the sky had not only burned their enemies, it had burned away the old belief that humans were weak, and in its place rose a new legend, one that would spread far beyond the stars, a new dawn. The battle was over. The skies of the Empire glowed with drifting wreckage. The bodies of warships burned out like dying stars. Across the capital, bells rang and people filled the streets, their voices rising in cries of triumph. The Empire had not only survived, it had struck back with a fury no one had believed possible. But deep within the palace, where silence replaced celebration, the queen prepared for decisions heavier than war itself. The princess returned, her armor marked with fire, her body scarred yet unbroken. She walked beside the human who carried no crown, no title, yet bore the respect of soldiers who had seen him fight. The guards at the gates bowed to the princess, but their eyes lingered on the human, some in fear, others in awe, for he had stood against the storm and not fallen. The queen summoned them to her throne, her face unreadable, her voice steady as stone. "You have returned victorious," she said, "but victory alone does not settle the future." Her words weighed heavy, for the court was gathered once more, and every noble, every general, every advisor waited to see what judgment she would give. The princess stepped forward. "Mother, without him, we would not stand here today," she declared, her voice filled with fire. "He turned the tide. He saved not only me but the Empire. You cannot deny what he has done." The queen's gaze turned to the human. His face was calm, his eyes steady, his posture unshaken. "You fought for a people not your own," she said, her voice slow and searching. "You risked your life for my daughter, for my throne, for an empire that once saw your kind as nothing." "Why?" she asked. The chamber fell silent. Every breath held. The human's voice was quiet, yet it carried to every ear. "Because she was beside me," he said. "Because in the fire of battle, in the silence of ruins, in the cold of endless night, she did not see me as weak. She saw me as her equal, and for that, I would fight 1,000 wars." The court erupted in whispers, shock rippling like a wave. The queen's eyes narrowed, yet her heart trembled. Her daughter's hand rested gently on the human's arm, a simple gesture, yet one that spoke louder than words. The bond between them was unshakable, forged not by politics, but by survival, by loyalty, by trust. The generals rose in protest. "This cannot be," they shouted. "No throne can stand with a human beside it. It is dishonor. It is danger." But the queen silenced them with a single raised hand. Her voice rang like steel through the chamber. "Enough," she said. She stood from her throne, her robes flowing like shadows of the stars. She walked down the steps until she stood before her daughter and the human. Her eyes studied them, weighed them, measured not just their faces but their spirits. At last, her voice broke the silence. "The Empire does not live by walls of pride. It lives by fire, by strength, by survival. My daughter has returned from the jaws of death, and she has returned with him. That is no accident. That is fate." The chamber gasped, some in outrage, others in awe. The queen lifted her hand and placed it upon her daughter's shoulder, then upon the human's. "From this day forward," she declared, "he is no stranger, no outsider. He is protector of the crown, shield of the Empire. Let all who hear know this truth. The royal blood walks with a human at her side." The bells of the capital rang again, this time louder, deeper. The news spread through the streets, across the stars, carried by whispers and songs. The Ali, and queen had embraced the impossible. The princess had returned, not only alive but with a human bound to her fate, and the galaxy trembled at the thought. For enemies heard the tale and felt fear. If one human could turn the tide of war, what might humanity hold in the shadows of their worlds? Allies heard the tale and felt wonder. Perhaps humans were not weak. Perhaps they were the fire no one had seen rising, and the Empire itself felt pride once more. Their future was no longer only alien, it was something greater. That night, as the palace grew quiet and the stars glowed beyond its towers, the queen stood alone at her balcony. She looked into the endless dark, remembering the years of grief, the nights of silence, the tears she had hidden from her people. Her daughter was alive, stronger than before, and beside her was a human who had proven that legends are not born from blood alone, but from the choices we make when death is near. The queen whispered to the stars, "The dawn has come, and it is not mine alone." And for the first time in countless years, she felt not grief, not doubt, but hope. Hope that her empire might not only survive but rise. Hope that her daughter's bond with the human would burn brighter than any fleet. Hope that the galaxy would remember this day, the day the alien queen believed she had lost her daughter, only to see her return with a human at her side, and with them, a new age was born.